Bias is something to be careful of. Everyone has biases about some things. Think about fashion. There are certain styles of clothes I just won't wear. Usually that's because I don't think they look good on me. They don't flatter me, at least not in my eyes, but sometimes I don't even know why I don't like something. For example, I just don't like shirts or sweaters with a V-neck. Other people might think they look fine, but it's my point of view that matters here, and I don't like them. This is a bias. There's really nothing wrong with it. The problem is when people have biases about things that are more important than V-neck clothes. When people have biases about race or nationality, that can lead to bigotry and other harmful kinds of bias. Also, people with strong biases tend to bypass logic and ignore facts when those go against their bias. That can be a big problem. Is it possible to express a point of view in an unbiased way? In other words, is a person's point of view always biased? No. A person's point of view can be neutral. A neutral point of view tends to be based on facts and evidence and leaves out opinion or bias. It is objective. A person with a neutral point of view tries to see things as they are without taking a side about them. A good example of a neutral point of view is a typical news story, something like this. On Wednesday, legislators in the United States House of Representatives voted 221 to 198 to pass Bill H.R. 1911, which resets interest rates on federal student loans and avoids the doubling of rates scheduled for this summer. This bill, if passed into law, would peg the interest rates for new student loans to yields on the 10-year Treasury note. This would cause the interest rates to fluctuate, but maximum caps would limit how much those rates could grow. The majority leader of the Democrat-controlled Senate has endorsed a different plan, which would extend the current 3.4% fixed rate for Stafford loans for low-income students. The Republican staff of the House Education and the Workforce Committee issued a report claiming that H.R. 1911 would prevent politicians from the business of setting student loan interest rates. The bill is not expected to pass the Senate without strong opposition from Democrats. Why is the point of view of this story neutral? Because it only says what happened. It doesn't take a side. It says that Republicans have issued a statement in support of the bill. It says that Democrats in the Senate will probably oppose it. But it doesn't say which side is right or wrong. It doesn't say whether the bill is good or bad. A neutral point of view tries to stay objective. It tries not to be subjective. When a person's point of view is completely neutral, there is no bias. When is it best to have a neutral point of view? When is it best to be as objective as possible? Here are a few places where a neutral, objective viewpoint is good. What if all the news stories you read were written with a strong bias? You wouldn't know whether you were getting all the facts or just some of them. You might wonder whether some of the facts were distorted or simply made up. This is why news stories are supposed to just report the facts without telling you what to think about them. That's what you want from reports of events. You want to know exactly what happened, and then you can decide on your own what you think about it. A description of a patient's symptoms need to report just the facts as much as possible. I know this from my job. When a patient's symptoms aren't reported accurately, doctors can't form correct diagnoses about what the patient's problem might be. A diagnosis is a doctor's opinion of a patient's condition, but the doctor tries as much as possible to base that opinion on fact. Let's say I get a sample of my blood tested at a lab, and instead of reporting all of the test results, the lab report chooses just some of the results and leaves out others. The person preparing the report decides that some of the test results just don't matter. That wouldn't be good. The lab report should present the results accurately and completely. A doctor can then decide how significant those results are. Often in professional work environments like the office where I work, keeping a neutral point of view is required. Sometimes my bosses or coworkers might need my opinion about something, but often I need to leave my opinion out of it. I just need to clearly answer questions or accurately describe an issue without putting in my 2 cents. It's not always possible to be neutral. For example, these performance reviews. I had to write reviews of my peers. I wasn't being asked to be neutral. I was being asked to give my opinion. I could simply stick to the facts and nothing else, but that wouldn't really be providing my own judgment, and that's what my bosses were looking for from me. Hiding my own judgment and attitudes would mean I wouldn't be fulfilling my obligation in providing useful performance reviews. My bosses want to know who I think is doing the job and who isn't. They want to know where I feel my coworkers' strengths are and what weaknesses they might have. This means that I have to give my subjective opinion. I can't be neutral. Okay, so is it possible to not be neutral but not be unfairly biased? Yes, if I stick to the facts. And if I think of the facts first and then draw my conclusions from them and not the other way around. What does that mean? That means that I base my opinion on my considerations of the facts. People with a bias about something already have their minds made up about it. They tend to ignore the facts that don't support their bias or that contradict it. They tend to focus only on facts that support their bias, but this doesn't give an accurate picture of things. Shaping facts to your bias means that you only look at the parts of the picture that fit your bias. Shaping your own opinion to the facts means that you look at the whole picture and then decide what you think about it. Dr. Myers and the other doctors were not neutral in the review of my performance. They made judgments about my performance. In some areas, they thought I've done great. In other areas, they think I need to make improvements. In recent months, Jennifer seems to have been less friendly with patients and coworkers. This has been especially noticeable considering the high level of friendliness and good cheer Jennifer usually projects at almost all times. Jennifer has not been unfriendly, but she seems less cheerful and more like she's simply going through the motions of her job. She doesn't smile very often and doesn't speak to patients or coworkers beyond the bare minimum on many days. We would like to see Jennifer work on returning to something approaching her previous level of friendliness and enthusiasm. She was always a bright spot in the office until fairly recently. For example, this is the part of the review Dr. Myers gave me that has to do with my friendliness level needing some improvement. This is based on observation of my behavior. Is it factual? Honestly, yes. This is how I've been lately. That I've been less friendly is a subjective viewpoint, but it's also based on factual observation. Spotting bias can be tricky. Facts are facts, but sometimes I don't know all the facts in what I'm reading. Then it can be difficult to know that what I'm reading is unfairly biased. But there are a couple of things to look for that can help me spot bias. If the author of an article about weight loss consistently uses negative and judgmental words to describe people who are obese according to the body mass index, words like lazy, undisciplined, self-indulgent, and gluttonous, then that author probably has a bias against people who meet the medical definition of obesity. This indicates a negative bias because the words are consistently negative. But if the author tends to use only positive words to describe something, that could indicate a positive bias in favor of that subject. Authors can still show a strong bias even if they rely on facts to support their arguments. The bias comes from which facts they choose to use and which they leave out. But often, when an author is strongly biased for or against something, the author will use opinions as support as well as facts. Sometimes, an extremely biased author will only use opinions as support. When authors use phrases such as I like, I love, I think, I feel, I believe, or the reverse, these signal that opinions are on their way. However, these tells won't always be there, so sometimes you have to think carefully about how factual what you're reading is. Nice work! You've completed this section. You can move on to the next section.